and welcome to the National Good Food Network webinar. We have these webinars monthly, the third Thursday of the month, always at 3:30 Eastern. A little bit about the Good Food Network. It's a national coordinating network focused on scaling up healthy food, scaling up good food. We work with 10 different regions around the country, working on different components and elements of the value chain, the supply chain, focused on building small and medium-sized grower and producer capacity, helping them with on-farm training and helping them with food safety training, essentially getting these folks ready to work, those folks that are interested in working with larger markets and having their farm be a viable operation. Those are the types of growers that we work with. We connect also to buyers. We have a buyer program and some partnerships through the National Good Food Network and through some of our regional leads that have helped us connect our growers to new markets with retail and with institutions like schools, universities, and hospitals. Again, we work with 10 different regional leads around the country. You can go to ngfn.org to find out more about our regional lead teams and their contact information and link to their websites to the work that they're doing. We have an advisory council that includes all of our regional leads and some other partners from around the country. The NGFN is housed at Wallace Center at Winrock International, based in Washington, D.C. That's where the national coordination effort is held in this. And this webinar is based out of our offices in Arlington as well. And again, we connect with our regional leads. We also connect with other networks like the National Farm to School Network, School Food Focus, Community Food Security Coalition. We're doing some national coordinating programs with them, as well as connecting our regional leads on the ground. And we also help and work on efforts that connect our regional leads to other regional funding within their region. Last but not least, our network is what we call a connector to knowledge. And a lot of the work that we're talking about today on this webinar and other webinars is what we consider knowledge. It's useful models, business models, market-based approaches to doing value chain work around this country, bringing more good food into institutions, into communities, with a particular focus on those most vulnerable. Now on to our presenters of the webinar today. Kathy Ruhf is a regional lead for the NGFN, for the National Good Food Network. She's been a mentor, and her experience has lent greatly to the development of this network, and you'll hear more about why as she goes through her presentations today. She's a coordinator for the Northeast Sustainable Agricultural Working Group since 1992. A regional food and farm network. So it's a regional network in the Northeast, one of our regional leads, working on policy, food systems development, and public education engagement. Kathy has led many food systems initiatives and has a particular interest in regionalism and regional approaches to food systems change, which is why she's one of the leaders on this call today. Her partner on this particular call is Kate Clancy. Kate Clancy is also a member of the regional lead team of the Northeast. She too has been a great mentor and a great help as we work to try to build this National Good Food Network. Kate's a food systems consultant and a senior fellow in the Minnesota Institute for Sustainable Ag at the University of Minnesota. She is also a visiting scholar at the Center for a Livable Future, Johns Hopkins University School of Public Health. She has a wealth of experience that she shares with us often. Kathy consults on food systems work all around the country, with her specialties too, also in regional food systems, ag of the middle value chains, many of the partners we work with through this network, and a focus on food systems policy. So with that, I'll hand it over to our leads, and they'll take you through the presentation.
Okay, I guess that's me. Hi, everybody. This is Kathy Ruhf, and Kate and I will be double teaming on this presentation today. Thanks to the Good Food Network and the Wallace Center for the opportunity to do this. Kate and I want to say at the outset that we've been engaged in an exploration for the last, well, I guess it's a matter of years now, on the notion of regionalism and regional food systems, and we're really excited to be able to share some of our thinking, which is definitely a work in progress with all of you on the webinar today. What we'll be doing is sharing with you some of our ideas, which are still works in progress, about regionalism as a concept, particularly as it applies to food systems. We'll talk a little bit about regional food systems and what we mean and some of the challenges around that concept, and give you a couple of examples of how we in the Northeast have been working around implementation of regional food systems. So that's where we expect to go today. See if I can make this slide move. Okay, so we're not going to read bullet by bullet. You can see what is on the screen in front of you, and we'll highlight some of the important features and then talk a little bit about some of the concepts that are embedded there. Just by way of background, NESAWG, as Marty mentioned, is a regional food and farm working group. Been around since 1992, and right at the beginning of our founding, we established ourselves as a regional food systems network. So we've been looking comprehensively at food and agriculture system issues for all of that time. Kate is a really incredible historian on these issues, and we decided not to go into great detail about the history of some of our thinking, but just to let you know, we've done some. There has been some early thinking on regional food systems. We've done some writing on the topic in the past and focused, for example, on a regional approach and consensus building around the Farm Bill. We have a working paper that will be available soon, and as we'll mention with a reference at the end, we are about to have an article published in the online journal Choices about regional food systems, so we can refer you to that. It's just about to go to be published. So Kate, I'll turn this one over to you.
Yes, and I'll say hello everyone, and thanks for being here. Kathy and I are always really happy to get chances to share our thinking with other folks. There's some other context that I thought might be useful with regard to regional thinking that are more concepts and also some experiences. One is the fact that I think I got interested in regions decades ago in part by being introduced to some regional structures, some regional institutions, one in particular the Appalachian Regional Commission, which struck me then and even more now as a very useful way to think about what kinds of institutions need to serve what kinds of functions that we're trying to do in deglobalizing the food system. The second context here is a fancy way of saying it, I guess, is systems optimization, but it's to recognize the importance of applying some thoughts and concepts like efficiency and competitive advantage to the work that we're doing. I think that often we have allowed those very useful terms to be co-opted by the dominant food system, and we shouldn't do that because things like efficiency are important in our alternative food systems as well. I've put land use decisions here, and you'll hear us talking several times about land use throughout the presentation, because the land use decision tradition of occurring at local levels can be really problematic for a lot of the things that we're trying to do. And I always have ringing in my head these old Italian farmers in upstate New York in the mid-1980s who would say things like, Kate, don't worry about it. If we don't grow it here, they'll grow it in the next county. And I happen to know that they were making the same bad decisions in the next county to get rid of their farms. So there's got to be some other ways of looking at land use and where that takes place, the decisions take place. And then just, I think it must be pretty obvious that because the Northeast is situated where it is, a whole bunch of small states It may be easier for us in the Northeast to be thinking about regional food systems, but Kathy and I believe very strongly that a lot of the thoughts that we're going to share with you today are applicable pretty much anywhere. I would point out that in January, the New England Agricultural Commissioners all came to Washington to talk to Secretary Vilsack about a regional food system. So that was pretty exciting. And then there's just been a lot of experience among these states that are kind of close together over a very long period of time. But again, we think that this applies to multiple other regions as well. Kathy?
Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about the concept of regionalism broadly, and a regional framework is based on something that might seem obvious, but oftentimes public policy doesn't really reflect that, the notion that regions are in fact different, and we'll talk about what a region is on the next slide, and that a regional framework responds to regional differences and characteristics, strengths and challenges and needs. At the same time, regionalism encourages regional approaches and solutions, as Kate was suggesting in the land use example, that you know, we all talk about sector silos and so on, and oftentimes solutions need to be looked at the optimal scale, and that's really a lot of what we're talking about right now. And in a regional approach does guard against either not only against a one-size-fits-all approach, but also against disadvantaging or advantaging one region over another. So when we talk about regions, what do we mean? And it's really important to say at this point that regions' boundaries are fluid, so that we can think about regions being nested in other regions. For example, Cape Cod is part of Massachusetts. Massachusetts is part of New England. New England is part of the Northeast. Each one of those can be seen as a region in and of itself. Other examples are from the Northeast. We talk about the Northeast Kingdom, the Mid-Atlantic. Outside the Northeast, there's the Great Lakes region, the Pacific Northwest, Florida Panhandle. So there are, each of you from wherever you're listening from can think about various regions at various scales in your locale. Regions are defined by physical, socioeconomic, cultural, and political features. And of course, because we are working in food systems, we understand that food systems are particularly rooted in regions because of their geographic base and the natural resource base. So with that in mind, we also want to make sure to point out that the nested notion also gives us an opportunity to think more broadly about what the optimal scale is to address things regionally. And that leads us to the next point about how that's both an opportunity and a challenge. And what Kate and I call the language conundrum, we want to spend a little bit of time on, because this is an exploration for us, and sometimes we're seen as sort of language Nazis, if you will, and it really is important to us to explore what these terms mean and how in some ways we're sabotaging an ability to move forward with food systems development by not being as clear as we might be. And of course, we all know the recent popularity of local food systems, and that has enormous resonance among consumers as well as retailers and policymakers, and that's great. There's an enormous amount of energy around that, and at the same time, I think we all understand that there are different definitions of local. We've looked at the literature, and you know, it's all over the map. Literally, it can be 50 miles from a particular locale, it can be 100 miles. Sometimes it's whatever in the state. One USDA program defines it as within a state or 400 miles. Is that correct, Kate? Did I get that right?
Right.
So there's a lot of variation on what people think of as local, while the term has a lot of emotional cachet. So another problem in the language arena is that local is often conflated with other terms such as direct market or small scale or fresh or produce or sustainable, and they aren't necessarily the same at all. On the other end, local has been co-opted by national and global agribusiness. And I was at a conference of New England fruit and vegetable growers, and there was a big banner in the plenary session that said, "Buy local, buy New England." And I thought it was great and also a little bit confusing, because it's New England wouldn't be conceived of really as a locale, but more so as a region. But there's no language, especially language that has any resonance around regionality. The local trap is also really important because we don't want to get into a regional trap either by ascribing certain features like it's more sustainable or they're better farmers, or because you know the face on your farmer that it's a better product. There is an article that Kate and I would recommend that really is provocative about guarding against ascribing certain attributes to local or to regional. More recently, I've seen many organizations and speakers talk about either local and regional food systems or local/regional food systems, and that begs the question of whether they mean the same, or are they interchangeable, or are they in fact different? And if they are different, what in fact is the difference? So we want to make clear that in a regional food system, local is part of regional. It's absolutely necessary and at the heart of what many of us are doing in really great work, but it's not sufficient. At our recent conference that we'll talk about later, somebody referred to regional as 1,000 points of local, which has a certain charm. And at the same time, regional is more than just the sum of a lot of local food system efforts. Regions do evolve, and that this scale is really at the core of what we mean by a regional food system. What is the optimal scale, distance, infrastructure that will serve a regional food system? Again, regions are nested, and it also gives the possibility for us to talk about what is the relationship of supply chains and food system transactions within a region and across regions. So it opens up the notion of interregional trade, for example, and also the challenge that one person's region might be another person's encroachment. We come to the conclusion that however we think about food systems, it does take a region. So our definition in progress about a regional food system is one in which as much food as possible to meet a population's food needs is produced, processed, distributed, and purchased at multiple levels and scales within a region with these good results to stakeholders in the region. So with that, I'm going to turn that over to Kate, who will more particularly unpack some of the elements that we think comprise a regional food system.
Thank you, Kathy. And although this says 4 dimensions, it's really 5 dimensions. So you'll see that as I go on. And let me also start out by saying that for the purposes of a lot of our thinking, acknowledging what Kathy just said, that we recognize that regions can be defined in many different ways. Our focus is on multi-state regions, and that will help you follow along as we go through some arguments in favor of regional food systems here. And so the food supply, natural resource sustainability, economic development, diversity, and values. And under food supply, which is where I think maybe I come at this because I'm a nutritionist, it's where I feel you have to start thinking about a food supply. how much food do the people in your area, local, region, etc., need? And several recent studies have provided us some very useful parameters. And you can see here the work in New York and the recent study from the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission on the Greater Philadelphia Food System, that I think it's really useful and pretty important for a lot of groups working on these questions to quickly figure out what is the total food need of the population that you've set your boundaries around, so that you have an idea of how much can be produced in the region itself and how much is going to be imported, and a lot of other questions that come out of understanding this. So you can see the numbers that those two recent studies have come up with in terms of capacity. These don't necessarily, these do not include what might be a good amount of urban agriculture, which will be important. But my guess is that even when you start to include reasonable amounts of urban agriculture, that even most regions will only be somewhat on the way to self-reliance. One of the ways of thinking about then, once you know the food needs of a region, is to how to become as self-reliant as possible, is to expand the geographic area that you're thinking about, as long as that expansion is being done in a sustainable way. Two examples, I won't go into them here, are the Good to Grow project in the Upper Midwest and the Eastern Seaboard project that's being done with a cast of thousands on the Eastern Seaboard and led by the Agricultural Research Service folks. The second dimension of regional food systems that Kathy and I are focusing on is resource sustainability. And as I started to suggest a couple minutes ago, a huge number of land use decisions are being made all over the country with no analysis of the food and water needs of the actual population, and with a tremendous, and I don't have to add, which we did though, a tremendous amount of pressure to develop farmland. And of course, when local areas are not thinking about the area's food security as development decisions are being made, a lot of those local decisions may be undermining the area's food security in the very long term. Another thing that a lot of you know about is often the claim has been made that local food transport is more efficient, that food transportation and distribution is more efficient at a local level. A lot of analyses show that that, in fact, is probably not necessarily the case in most cases. That, in fact, because larger loads of food lower the transportation fuel use per unit of food. And then just to point out, under resource sustainability, there are a lot of resource management initiatives that exist at regional levels already. We have a lot of precedents for this, like the Chesapeake Bay Commission, like the Great Lakes Commission, and many others. And I would also mention many multi-state regional planning commissions, which are good models for thinking about what we're about here. The third dimension that we're looking at is economic development. And I assume also probably by now many of you have seen the work of Marsden and his colleagues in England that started some time ago, where they have spelled out the different ways that short food supply chains can be organized as an alternative to conventional supply systems. One of them is face-to-face, that's direct marketing. The second is what they call spatial proximity, which is that foods are in markets that are from a region possibly, or at least from not the local area, but the information that accompanies that food is there on the product so that people purchasing the food knows where it comes from. I mean, for example, people in one of the Northeast states might know that this food was coming from another Northeast state. And then I'll go to the regionally scaled infrastructure. Our thinking about this is the following. In a lot of areas, the region would clearly be defined by cross-state boundaries, and just one of the easiest ones is the Southwest, the Four Corners, and the Southwest Marketing Network that many of you know is made up of 4 states. In looking at where new infrastructure needs to be built to get food around the region, it very well could be that it would make more sense to site new infrastructure, whether it's processing plants or slaughter plants or whatever, where the farmers and processors, the farmers are particularly, from all 4 of those states are within a decent driving distance. It could very well save money. It would be in terms of capital costs, and it very well might mean that some of the infrastructure that we're all talking about would be more efficiently used. That is, more people could use well-sited processing plants and distribution networks. And then also there's going to be a lot of trade for a very long time, and a lot of it will be quite appropriate. We're not, again, trying to be self-sufficient even in our local or our regional context. And so there are some really fun and exciting discussions to be had and thinking to be done about what is the appropriate trade with inside and between regions and national level operations. The 4th element that we're talking about is diversity, which is kind of the basis of all of the discussion that we're all having about how to have an alternative, a better alternative food system. Diversity of all types is necessary. It's likely that you would have more crop diversity and therefore more diversity in diets across larger regions, especially if they cross latitudes and are still efficient in terms of transportation, et cetera. But you would have a wider area with different kinds of farms, different soils, different cropping, et cetera. And this is going to become even more important as we deal with the effects of climate change, changing the hardiness zones, et cetera. Diversity also supports what we think of as flexibility and resiliency. Resiliency being the ability to bounce back from either a natural disaster or a human disaster that might occur in a particular area where there's a lot of drought in a part of an area, and it might be a good idea to have a region defined so that it would not be expected the entire region would suffer drought at the same time, as an example. We want a diverse scale of food chain components. When we're talking about small and mid-sized a lot, there's also, depending on the crop, depending on the geography and the area of the country, there's also still a place for some large-scale farms. And then I won't go into the resource efficiency again. There are multiple things to think about there, including human resources. We point out in the paper, for one thing, it may be, horror of horrors, that there would need to be more interconnection and working together of, say, laboratories or departments in land-grant universities in some states closed down, that some of that work may have to be spread across a region in order to make sure that the work doesn't disappear. And then finally, a very important point is around values. And all of us recognize inside of our discussions of sustainability that values are the overarching context of a lot of what we do. They're also the underpinning of the specific kind of conversations that we have and the activities that we undertake. So I think these are, pretty obvious. There's many more values. We just chose 3. Stewardship is the stewardship of land, of natural resources, of communities, etc. Equity refers to equity across states in a region, equity for farmers, things like getting fair prices, equities across the entire food chain in terms of people working in processing plants being treated fairly, farm workers, etc. And the equitable distribution of resources across or within a region to the states within a region, for example. And then finally, opportunity refers to, in our thinking, all the opportunities that need to be there for people who want to enter farming to be able to enter it, beginning farmers, new farmers, returning farmers, etc., and other kinds of opportunities. So those are the really key elements. We could have chosen many more to look at, but we had a space limitation when we were writing, and so we thought those were 5 very important elements. And back to you, Kathy.
Okay, thanks. Just to segue from Kate's slide there, the opportunity, we want to be clear that we're not only talking about producers, of course, that we're talking about entrepreneurs or business relationships all across the food system spectrum. I was just at a regional conference about rural development that had a food system, a regional food system track, and there was a lot of discussion about opportunity in rural communities, and I wouldn't limit that to rural communities, but it's also not limited just to producers. Okay, so now we're going to enter into the part of the conversation about a couple of ways that we in the Northeast have implemented this regional food system thinking, and one is in our annual event sponsored by NESAWG, which this year focused particularly on regional food systems. We called it It Takes a Region, thanks to the visionary thinking of Michael Rosine, and we formed or strengthened work groups around various topics related to regional food systems. We circulated our working paper so that we could get input from all of the various participants, and we took head-on some of the challenges around regional food system thinking, and I'm just going to mention a couple here that are bullet pointed. And one is some very interesting pushback, and I want to be really candid about this, from folks who work at the local scale, feeling that there was some perceived either competition or tension, or that somehow regional food systems were usurping local, and at least in our thinking, that's not the case at all. That they're really part and parcel, both necessary, and we're really talking about a lot of people talk about scaling up is one way to think about it, or the complementarity of supply, volume, direct versus longer supply chain. So there's a whole bunch of complementarity, and it's certainly not meant to compete. But I think in some people's mindset, there is a messaging challenge there, and that's certainly also true with respect to the public. Everybody knows what or has a warm feeling in talking about local food systems. The term regional doesn't have the same evocative sway at all. So how we begin to build a message around the concept, how we make some of these connections in terms of messaging is a really significant challenge. We also want to make sure that just like we want to avoid the local trap, we avoid the regional trap by making assumptions about that regional food systems are good or imbued with certain values or features per se, because they're not necessarily. And also that regional is not in the same way that local may or may not be just spatial. As Kate said, it's also defined by a set of values. Scale and culture are very integral parts of regional thinking. And another huge challenge are some of the policies and parochial politics that might undermine regional efforts. And on the one hand, Kate pointed out some really excellent examples of cross or multi-state regional commissions. On the other hand, I know that many state departments of agriculture understandably are very protective of their own farmers and really discourage farmers, let's say, from across a state line to enter into a local farmers market, even though the distance for that farmer, you know, is a very short one to participate. So there's a possible tension, and also, you know, a lot of grant programs are directed at the state level and don't necessarily encourage multi-state approaches. So there are some barriers to thinking regionally. The final part of this presentation that Kate and I would like to get into is how we've looked at regional food systems within our regional lead team project. Marty mentioned that we are one of 10 projects that focused on scaling up, and we were, I think, the only project that took a very broad 12-state approach to looking at a regional team, and we decided to try to identify and learn more about what we call regional value chains, regionally focused value chains, and we created a learning community of leaders and researchers, and we identified and surveyed 35 entities, and you can find our report at the NESAWG website. I'll turn my page. What I would like to describe here is as much as regional and local food systems is a challenge, we've also chronically struggled with, and I don't think as a movement come to terms with what we mean by a value chain. And Kate and I just want to posit right here some distinctions that we made in our approach to this project that we'll describe to you. Oftentimes people talk about a value chain as being something in which there's a value-added product, and we want to distinguish that and say that a value-added product like making tomato sauce from tomatoes is different from a value chain in which the product or products are differentiated particularly by attributes or values that customers want, either within how the product is produced or where it's produced. So there's a certain set of attributes to the product that would describe the value chain. Then further from that, another level is a values-based value chain in which the business relationships in the supply chain are based on an articulated set of values. So these distinctions might not work for everyone, but I think the point that we'd like to make is that there are differences there, and even if we're still sort of swimming around in the language a little bit, that there are some distinguishing features. So for our project, we focused on what we call regional value chains that are at least have 3 entities in them. In other words, it's not farm direct to consumer, so that there's some aspect of aggregation and distribution in the chain. We were, for this particular project, not interested in direct sales. That each value chain had a driver, and Kate will describe that interesting concept in a second, and that there is a significant volume of differentiated products, so that when we're talking about regional scale, it does very much have to do with volume. And that finally the entities that we interviewed may or may not have, but also may be striving for the ethical and values-based business relationships and or the sustainable or green practices. And we found, interestingly, that if we had limited ourselves to those value chains that only had both a green orientation and a values-based business orientation, there would have been far fewer in our exploration. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Kate, and she's going to tell you a little bit about our findings from these interviews.
Thank you, Kathy. Yes, and I'll go through this pretty quickly. The full report is on the NESAWG website. It's on that website is at the end of our presentation. So what we did is I did hour to hour and a half interviews and went back by email and asked questions of 35 different supply chains in the Northeast. And everything I'm going to report to you is what they told me and that Kathy and I aggregated across the whole report. So the three top goals of and I interviewed only, this is very important, I interviewed only the driver of the chain. That is the person in the whole chain that very likely initiated the chain and still plays kind of the central role in the chain, and you'll see pretty soon that that could be a lot of different people. So the goals of the driver that the drivers told us they had for their chains, the top three were, as you see on the slide, support local or state producers, and that often included saving farmland in their area, provide environmental benefits through farming, and provide local food. How you interpret the third one is that a lot of people wanted to be able to provide local food for local processors or regional processors or local restaurants, etc. There were other goals, but we're just giving you the top things here. The next slide shows you the principal function of the driver. Remember, this is kind of the key person that's playing a role in the chain. A large number of them were distributors, and then you can see that breakdown. I think what kind of astounded us was how many drivers had to play, either had to play or chose to play multiple roles in the chain. Half play at least 5 roles. About 20% of our drivers were playing 7 out of a possible 13 different roles in a supply chain. So they're really working themselves. The next is whoops, I think I skipped one. Jeff, can you get me back? Thank you. The food produced by there were lots of others, but only dairy or produce, 6 each, a mix of foods, 10, and then a number of other possibilities of the kinds of foods that were being handled in the supply chain. This descriptive information, I think what strikes you there is this incredible range, even just out of 35 chains. I'll just focus on the hybrid line here. Most of you know that hybrids refer to chains that a hybrid chain is a supply chain that includes some kind of conventional player. And we had more hybrids of our chains than non-hybrids. That means that 18 of the chains included, for example, a conventional trucking distributor, or that the food was being put into conventional supermarkets, not alternative supermarkets, etc. And then there's just some other information there that you can look at. The product attributes that we asked about were multiple. This is the breakdown again from our 35 chains. About half of them were handling certified organic. 10 of them because we had a lot of meat and milk. A lot of milk, dairies. This is the Northeast, folks. Were had systems in which there was no use of RVCs. Again, because of beef and dairy production, 7 of them were focusing on grass-fed and no antibiotics. About 20 were using the word local, sometimes very explicitly, sometimes kind of implicitly. Several were using the term regional. And then another set of elements is, as Kathy described, the values-based elements, most of which have been defined mainly by the Agriculture of the Middle initiative. So we asked questions about that, and about a third of our value chain said that they do have open relationships among all the members of the chain, from the farmer through to the retailer, or parts of that. About half of them were doing the best they could to offer decent prices to farmers. About half, and not always the same, these are not always the same chains, maintained farmer identity throughout the chain, through wherever the endpoint was of the chain, either at wholesale or retail. And in about 25% of the chains that do have values-based values directing them, farmers were involved in decision-making through the chain, not just at the level of production. I took a lot of notes on all the challenges that these folks are having. And these were the top 5, although there are multiple others, and they are mentioned in the report. And these 5 are kind of together. There's not really an order of priority here. One big challenge was managing growth. And that's a challenge of any small business or growing business, and it's no different for these supply chains that are, in almost all cases except 2, hoping to get somewhat bigger in order to increase sales, in order to increase income, in order to increase the folks who are getting access to the food. A very interesting challenge is more supply. That would be a whole topic of what it will take to get more farmers in any kind of area to be part of these kind of chains, and because a lot of these processors and distributors need more supply and they're not finding it in the Northeast. Another challenge is getting farmers who have been used in most cases, but not all, to just sell into commodity markets, even if it's been vegetable and fruit commodity markets. And a lot of farmers still don't understand what the market is calling for in terms of quality, et cetera, packaging, et cetera, and the new roles that farmers have to take on in terms of being part of the face of the chain, et cetera. This next one I think is very interesting, and I'll describe it very quickly. This came from in some cases from some people who have been involved in local and regional food supply chain work for a long time. And that is, Kathy mentioned a while ago that there are all these different definitions of local. Some of those definitions are, the geographic area is extremely small. That's causing a lot of problems for some farmers and distributors, because the retailers are saying, we only want stuff that comes from within 40 miles. And there's a very limited amount of local food in 40 miles in many places. So these distributors are trying to educate the retailers about that the definition of even local, in many cases, needs to be somewhat larger than what people are expecting it to be. And then the last challenge is for some chains, they've got lots of customers. For other chains, they would like a lot more. We asked questions about policy issues. We were not presented with a lot of policy issues. I won't go into what that might mean here. Most of the policy issues related to food safety, that these chains are running into. We asked about technical assistance, and the top two were they could use a lot of technical assistance. They didn't know where it would come from in order to improve their websites, their ordering, et cetera, et cetera. And then the technical assistance around organizational development, that was very strong. Again, these are small businesses, small organizations in many cases, not all. And so they have the same challenges that all startup or maturing small businesses have. And product development, again, to add more value to the raw commodities so that the chain is earning more. And a lot of these chains don't have product developers in them or working with them yet. What's going well? I got lots and lots of really cool responses, and these are kind of the top four. In many cases, the partners in the chain have good relationships, good synergies. Demand in a lot of these chains in markets is high. The sales are growing. As you saw, a lot of them are trying to give farmers good prices. And there's just a lot of new interest. Everybody mentioned there's just a lot of new interest in local food and our regional food, as you all on this call are pretty responsible for. Jeff, get me back again, please. Sorry. Where chains are in the development process, these kind of come out of the challenges or things they want to do next. A lot of desire to work at a somewhat bigger scale, to be regional, to go across state lines for all the reasons that we've talked about before. They need more supply. They don't quite know where it's going to come from, and they need the farmers they're working with to understand what these new markets are asking for. Next, yes. We couldn't stop ourselves from coming up with what would be some research questions out of this study, and they're on the list here, and I think I've probably just talked about most of these. We think it would be very useful to study these value chains at different stages of their development and be very clear about that in reporting out what stage of development the chains are in so that people can start to understand the aging process or the development process that the chains are going through. And let's see, is there anything else here? I think that's pretty clear. The fifth, the soft fabric of these relationships, we think it's important to learn more about how the relationships within the chain are being initiated, how they're being managed, what's going well, what's not going so well, how successful they're being as a community, etc. And so then finally here, the next steps for us is to compile all the existing research, starting with the research that's been done in the region. We do have a really great collaborative research agenda. A research group already started, and they're working on multiple tasks right now. We would like to see whether NESAWG or other people in the region could take up the task of developing a way to match up people with the technical assistance they need. And of course, Kathy and I particularly, but lots of other people are coming up with new ways to foster future networking and organizing in our region, and also to encourage it in other regions around the country. So this final slide is our way to contact us, the NESAWG website and Choices Magazine. When that is online, the Choices Magazine, our article is a part of an entire issue on local and regional food. There are 7 or 8 other articles on local food. I've skimmed them all, and they're really excellent. So I think this is going to be a nice asset to the community and a good resource for all of you. And thank you so much.
Well, thank you. That was great. I want to encourage you to continue to type in your questions. We do have several questions already, and I'm going to try to focus on the ones that my guess is aren't particularly addressed in the paper. So like on particular sort of the larger questions. Although I do want to start out, and there was interest, Kathy, in that article that you were referring to about the ascribing characteristics to local food that aren't necessarily appropriate. Do you have the reference for that?
I do. It's the article is called "Avoiding the Local Trap." The authors are Brandon Bourne, B-O-R-N, as in born again, and Mark Purcell, and it's in the Journal of Planning, Education, and Research, Volume 26, Number 2, and that was published in 2006.
Perfect. Thanks.
Yep.
Michelle asks, she's trying to figure out scale for regional staple foods, but she's having trouble finding examples around the country that scale down from the global system. Do you have any thoughts on this?
I think I know what that's referring to. This has been a very interesting question that was asked by the Community Food Security Coalition folks, oh gosh, 10 years ago, too. And I think you have to work from the other end to get the answer here. And it also poses the question of being realistic about staple foods and competitive advantage. It very well could be that there still is a competitive advantage to raise a lot of corn, not too much like now, but to still raise corn where it grows the best. And that could still be in the Midwest. Certainly it's many, many other places in the country. And it still might make some sense to grow some good amount of wheat in Kansas and the state of Washington. But the way that makes sense is that you look at all the staple foods and all the other foods that are needed in a diet, and you make some reasonable trade-offs with regard to energy use, dry land, the ability to dry land farm, et cetera, et cetera. So I hope that makes some sense, but I don't know that anybody's actually tackled the question that the questioner raised.
I would just add that I really appreciate the questioner thinking in terms of staple foods, because that's a lot of what we like to embed in the regional food system thinking, that we're not just talking about local, fresh produce and so on, so that if we look at the full diet, then scale takes on a bit of a different dimension. So thanks for that question.
Linda asks if you looked across regions at all in comparing key differences between regions, and also what key indicators you used in the study.
Sure. Well, the value chain study, we didn't look, we focused on the 12 states of the Northeast, and so when you ask a question about comparing regions, it really depends on how you define the region or regions that you're comparing. I saw another question on here that somebody said, how does the Mid-Atlantic region compare to the Northeast? Well, in some circles, the Mid-Atlantic is part of the Northeast. So in broad terms, there's another paper from 2006 that NESAWG published called Regionalist Approaches to Farm and Food System Policy, where we took several dimensions about how to understand a region and regional differences, and I'll just say what those are. In terms of agri-food, regions can be defined in terms of landscape characteristics such as soils and water resources and climate, agricultural land uses and production systems that work in that context, and then broader socioeconomic factors such as demographics, development patterns, infrastructure and markets, and then political relationships and identities. So those are some of the like 4 major frameworks for describing and then comparing regions. So I hope that's a little bit helpful. And again, that paper is on NESAWG.org, and it does unpack why think in those terms, and then it looks predominantly at the Northeast, but not exclusively.
I have 2 quick definition questions, but before I get to that, Matt points out that the choicesmagazine.org site now has the new issue up, the local food issue, and I can only imagine that it's because of this webinar. It couldn't be any more coincidental.
As of today,
do it for this webinar.
Great. So the 2 definitions are what is an alternate retailer, and what do you mean when you say small and mid-sized grower?
Kate, you can handle either of those. I think what we were meaning by an alternate is the more alternative or natural food retailers compared to the broad conventional supermarket chains.
And I'll add that from another major study that I've been working on with a large group of people that's going to come out in June, I've come away feeling it would be very helpful if we could actually come to some agreement about what are conventional supermarkets and what are alternate supermarkets. Because it's not, I don't think it's clear at all yet right now what they are, and so it makes sense that somebody asked us how we're using it, and that's what Kathy has just given you.
The question about definition around scale or small versus mid-size, again, people use different definitions. Most of us probably know the USDA definition of a small farm being gross sales of under $250,000 annually. The Agriculture of the Middle project looks at sales between, let's see, Kate, help me out here, between 50,000 and 500,000.
Yeah, and sometimes it's
sales.
50,000.
Yeah, so those are sales-based. I think sometimes the sales or size attribute gets confused with choice of market, and sometimes small typically is led to mean direct, and mid-size is more the groups that are the size of farm that is struggling with trying to be in the commodity market and are not doing well. I would encourage the asker to look at the Ag of the Middle website for a really good unpacking of the concepts around mid-sized farms.
Yes.
Josh asks how one could get involved as an RVC networker.
Call me.
Yeah, right. And the National Good Food Network can also help with that. So that's, you can contact us at contact@ngfn.org. I'll go over that later. Good. Maria asks if you're willing to share your survey questions.
The full report is on the website that we referenced, and the appendix of the report has the full survey, as well as the list of all of the interviewed entities.
And I would add that if we would be happy to share the research questions, and if you use any of them, would you please let us know, because we would love to keep some track of where people are doing some of the same kinds of research. We know where it's being done at a very large scale through the Ag of the Middle research projects, but we certainly know what Rich Pirog and others are doing at Leopold Center, but we wouldn't know where others are doing this, and so please be in touch with us if you start doing this kind of research.
Linda, I'm going to summarize your question here. She is essentially asking if you looked at the spatial economics of regional food systems. Growers can get much better prices in dense urban areas than they can in the sort of rural areas surrounding them. Have you looked at that at all?
No, but we're very aware of that phenomena. And it needs to be a part of the thinking about how the boundaries of an area or a region grow to meet the needs of those regions, and very much the ones that have large cities in them. And I think the Northeast, we realize that the Northeast is one of 3 or 4 places where the huge cities have a lot, especially New York City itself, have a lot to do with what our regional food system is going to look like when it's actually more like a regional food system and not what it is right now. So it's a very good question, and it really needs research.
And I also think that it's a lot about what the National Good Food Network is about, which is trying to look at scaling up so that the producers of wholesale at the mid-sized scale of products that are not direct marketed or not in peri-urban locations can get a differentiated product and do a little better on price than they would if they're competing in the commodity market.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask a couple questions that may be too highly detailed for this context, but I'll throw it out there. Cheryl wanted to know about the business structure. Are all of these value chains part of for-profits? Are there non-profits, co-ops, collaboratives? And also Melanie wanted to know if it was common to do pre-harvest crop planning and price agreements, or if it was more an ad hoc arrangement in general.
So the answer to the first question is that they were all forms of business entity, and those are also described in the report.
By far the largest number are corporations of some kind. About 2/3 of the total were one of 4 different kinds of corporations. There were a couple of co-ops, et cetera, and it is in the report.
And I didn't understand the second part of the question.
Second part is the growers, as they're planning their crops for the coming season, is there pressure from, or is there input from the buyer to the grower to do that crop planning, or do the growers say, okay, I have these crops now, can you sell them for me, can you distribute them and whatever?
I guess that would.
There were two major versions of that. Kathy, do you want to?
No, go ahead.
One was, in some cases, the buyer or distributor, when that was the buyer, was trying to, if they were working with multiple growers, was in fact trying to get a diverse set of product for his or her market. And so the buyers could be doing that. In some of the co-ops, that is a task that the co-ops take on themselves, which is very protective of the farmer's income, so that they're not supplying too much of one thing and dropping the price in the market. So there was a mix of where that was going on.
I'm going to say this is the last question, although it's actually 2 people's questions kind of mixed together since we're running out of time. But people are asking about coordination between rural, urban policymakers and people in the marketplace, the buyers. Did you see in your region any sort of group that brings all of these people together, since especially with a thing regionally, there's local governments, there's county governments, there's state governments, and buyers from all over. Did you see sort of interdisciplinary councils?
Not quite sure how to answer that. Well, I mean, Kate knows more about food policy councils than anybody, so that might be one example. There are some cross-state policy or multi-state policy entities. Commissions as one example. The Northeast States Association of State Departments of Agriculture, works as a region, so there are some regional examples, and I know some others that are not at the tip of my tongue right this second. In terms of cross-sector, I mean, certainly NESAWG has been trying to do that for the last however many years through its various events and working groups and so on. My hunch is that might be Thomas's question, and I'm not sure how else to unpack that one. Kate, do you have anything to add?
The only thing we could add, Kathy, is that in terms of, whether in the Northeast there is a cross-state entity that's helping to build the connections among value chains and other things, no, there isn't anything like that. There is something called the Northeast Sustainable Traders. We've mentioned it in the slide. That's a kind of an ad hoc group that's come together of quite a number of distributors, which is one of the roles in a chain of distributors in the Northeast states who have started to talk to each other and try and do some problem solving, and that may develop, or may not develop into something bigger over time.
Yeah, that's actually under the NESAWG umbrella, and we're applying for example, for a feasibility study to look at some of the transportation and particularly transportation and aggregation barriers around these regionally focused value chains. So, we're trying to keep things moving along.
Great. Well, thank you, Kate and Kathy. This was great. I want to encourage our audience to read their article in Choices Magazine. There is a link directly to the article on our the website, ngfn.org/webinars. Our National Good Food Network webinars are the third Thursday each month at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and all of the webinars are archived and accessible on that same webpage, ngfn.org/webinars. However, our next webinar is as a bonus webinar. We added an extra webinar in May. We'll do the standard third Thursday, but additionally on May 6th, that's the first Thursday of May, Rich Pirag, who is the Associate Director of the Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture at Iowa State, will present the second part of the Building Regional Food Systems series. Today's webinar focused on definitions in the Northeast, whereas on May 6th, in 3 weeks, Rich will focus on measuring economic impact and on the successes they've had in the Midwest, building the strength of their region on using their communities of practice. We think it'll serve as a great complement to this webinar and encourage you to register for it. Again, that webpage is ngfn.org/webinars. And the following webinar in May's usual slot, May 20th, will focus on linking diverse cultures in metropolitan areas. We have great presenter from Just Food and some others, and we have this growing archive of all the webinars, the slides, the recordings, written questions and answers, other resources, ngfn.org/webinars. Another service that the NGFN provides is to connect people through national and regional convenings, and we are co-sponsoring the 5th Annual Farm to Cafeteria Conference in Detroit, May 17 through 19. This is hosted by NGFN partner organization, the National Farm to School Network, in collaboration with the Urban Environmental Policy Institute at Occidental College and the Community Food Security Coalition. You can go to farmtocafeteriaconference.org for more information and registration forms. You can find us on YouTube, on Twitter, and our website, ngfn.org. I'd like to encourage you to add your name, interests, bio, and other information to our growing database of people, organizations, and funders, increasing your ability to connect to people within your regions and nationally. Look for the database link in the resources section on our website. Once again, food safety is heating up in Congress, and each second Tuesday of the month, the National Good Food Network Food Safety Coordinator leads a food safety conference call. You can visit ngfn.org/foodsafety for more information, including archives of the previous calls and dial-in information towards that second Tuesday. If you haven't already, sign up for our email updates. There's a link on the ngfn.org homepage. However, if you are already on our mailing list and would like food safety updates or other Wallace Center Initiative updates, go to the email from us sent on Monday and click the Change Email Update settings in the fine print in the orange section at the bottom. It's a little different than the original sign-up, so I just wanted to mention it here. Finally, please feel free to email us. Our email address is contact@ngfn.org. The NGFN would like to thank you for your time today, and once again, let me encourage you to fill out this survey. It'll open in your browser in just a moment. Thank you again to our presenters and to our audience. This concludes the webinar.